there's a truth few dare to say out loud. It's not that the woman left the man, but that she had left herself long before stepping out the door. We often think betrayal begins with a third person, but sometimes it begins with a silent dinner, a glance that no longer meets the other, a day he stops asking, "Are you okay today?" Love doesn't die from arguments. It dies in the empty spaces no one dares to name. And one day, when she starts choosing a dress for herself, not for him, when she no longer needs to be understood, no longer demands presence, no longer cries, that's the moment a man should be most afraid. This video isn't about cheaters. It's about what makes a woman choose to leave in silence, even while she's still living beside you. Section 1. The silent transformation in the psyche of a married woman. Before marriage, she was like an unsolved riddle, a symphony yet to be released. Every gesture, every glance she gave carried a veil of mystery that a man had to decode with his whole heart. In the years of courtship, she was an elusive breeze, a light he chased just to see more clearly. But then, once the wedding ended, once the ring slipped on, and shared dinners turned into routine, something inside her quietly fell away. The story of Marcus, a black man living in Chicago, is a true reflection of this. Marcus, 38, worked in IT and was married to Lily, a gentle and spirited elementary school teacher. In the early years, he used to tell his friends she was the first woman who made him feel alive, not just existing. She knew how to surprise him, asked questions that kept him pondering through the night, and always kept a space of her own, just enough to make him crave more, yet never feeling like he fully possessed her. But everything changed, not in a day, but through years of quiet drifting. Marcus recalled, "I can't pinpoint the exact day, but one morning, as I was getting ready for work, I realized she no longer looked at me. It wasn't a cold stare, it was an absent one, like I had become part of the furniture in this house, familiar, needed, but no longer worth discovering." Lily didn't change because she stopped loving, but deep down she believed she had arrived. Marriage, with all the expectations shaped by society and family, had become the final prize rather than the beginning of a long journey. And like many women, she began to let go of the things that once made her special. She no longer wrote handwritten notes, no longer asked curious questions about Marcus's work, no longer wore that blue dress he once complimented. And most of all, she no longer kept a secret garden within her for him to continue exploring. Everything was now exposed, the routines, the thoughts, even the private corners. From that moment she transformed, from the woman loved for her glow to the woman who belonged. But here lies the paradox of love. Attraction doesn't come from what we already possess, but from what we can still discover. When a woman loses herself in marriage, not because her husband demanded it, but because she believed she had to be completely honest, absolutely safe, and make the relationship solid, she unintentionally kills what once made her radiant: unpredictability. The bigger question is, who taught us that marriage is the end of the game? Society, or the old wounds that made us afraid of having to renew ourselves again and again? Women are not weak, but they are misled by the illusion that being loved forever comes from commitment, not from their own aliveness. In a talk with a close friend, Marcus once said, "I don't want a perfect wife. I want a woman who makes me ask every day, what is she thinking? What will she do next? Not because I'm suspicious, but because I still want to learn how to love her all over again." And that is the quiet tragedy of many modern marriages. When a woman doesn't leave her man, but say, leaves herself. Section 2. The forgotten desire. Marcus is not alone, because there are millions of men living in peaceful homes, yet unaware that love is silently drying up. Glance by glance, touch by touch, question by question left unspoken. And on the other side are women like Lily, who once shone brightly, who once made someone dizzy with longing, but then slowly folded themselves up to fit the mold of the ideal wife. They don't complain, they don't blame. They simply disappear from the very self that once made them lovable. And then one day, when a longing gaze comes from a stranger, not to possess, but simply to acknowledge, you are still attractive. What awakens inside a woman who hasn't been seen as a woman for so long? The story of Julia is a wake-up call for us all, that marriage doesn't just need love, it needs the effort to maintain desire, every single day. Julia's story, a mother of two living in Austin, Texas, reflects that very feeling. She was once an art student, known for her fiery red hair and eyes that seemed to speak. Back then, she could make anyone in the lecture hall turn their head with just a half smile. But now, after 12 years of marriage, she wears oversized cotton pajamas, ties her hair in a worn-out band, and often leaves the house with unlined eyes. She doesn't blame anyone, because she chose this life. But what she didn't anticipate was the feeling of becoming invisible in the very home she built. She shared that one day, while standing in the office elevator, a young co-worker, maybe 25, turned to her and asked, "Are you seeing anyone? I find you really attractive, like deep and different." Julia laughed it off, but her heart skipped a beat. Not because she wanted to cheat, not because she had feelings, but because for the first time in years, someone saw her as a woman, not just a shadow in an apron. "You know what?" she confided in her best friend. "I didn't feel guilty. I felt alive again." The problem wasn't her husband, a good, hard-working, kind man. But in his eyes, she had become familiar, no longer astonishing. And for a woman, being seen as obvious is more painful than being ignored. How many wives like Julia are living in homes filled with things, but starved for a gaze of longing? How many women sigh in silence when the beautiful dress they bought goes unnoticed by anyone in the house? How many who were once muses are now just schedule managers for 3 kids? And then, when another gaze appears, not an affair, not even a touch, it awakens something long asleep, the desire to feel attractive again. That's not wrong. That's instinct. Marriage doesn't die from lack of love. It dies from lack of effort to keep the spark alive. Men think that once they've won her, they can stop chasing. But women don't need to be possessed. They need to feel worth pursuing every day. Section 3. The emotional trap of a man in an affair with a married woman. But in a world full of emotional voids, it's not only those inside the marriage who feel lonely. Silence, when it drags on, doesn't just lead a woman astray within her own home. It also opens a door for a third person to enter, not through manipulation, but through empathy. Not every man who cheats lacks morality. Some, like Ethan, simply stumble into an unnamed loneliness. And they step in, not to possess, but to fill a void that should never have existed in the first place. But once emotions are awakened, they don't stop according to plan. And when the heart starts walking while the mind stands still, tragedy silently takes shape. No noise, no clear guilt, but still enough to burn down a once proud identity. Listen to Ethan's story. A man who didn't lose a woman, but lost himself in an affair he thought would just be a passing breeze. Ethan, a freelance photographer living in Brooklyn, New York, was once that kind of man. He met Celeste at a photo exhibition. She came alone, no wedding ring, didn't mention family, and just stood silently before a portrait of loneliness. When he asked her what she was thinking, she simply said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm living inside a photo, framed, orderly, beautiful, but emotionless." And that was the beginning. No flirting, no plan. Just 2 grown adults, finding each other in a void they thought was harmless. Ethan used to think, "She's married, she won't expect anything." And me, I just want to pass through each other's lives like 2 gusts of wind. But emotions never enter quietly. They whisper their way in, and stay like a storm. They started meeting in small cafes at noon, short phone calls at midnight. Ethan was never allowed into Celeste's daytime life. He didn't know which school her child attended, didn't know which month her husband's birthday was in. She told many stories, but they all stopped at a boundary. Intimate enough, never belonging. "It's funny," Ethan said. "I thought I was just passing by, but I turned out to be the one waiting." He waited for texts, waited for a call when her husband was away, waited for a look from her that said he was special, not just a placeholder for a missing piece. Then he started to feel jealous, not of the husband himself, but of the things the husband had: the right to be public, the right to walk beside her, the right to be called by name in daylight. Celeste never promised Ethan anything, but she never defined the boundaries either. And in that grey zone, Ethan got lost. He didn't lose her, because he never fully had her, but he lost something more precious: himself. He lost the confidence he once had, lost the ability to love without suspicion, lost his self-respect, having to live like a shadow in someone else's story. Being involved with a married woman is not just a moral dilemma, it's an identity crisis. When a man chooses to become the space that needs to be filled in someone else's life, he silently agrees to be drained, little by little, in silence, in faint hope, in a kind of love that never feels complete. And one day he wakes up, looks in the mirror, and no longer recognizes who he is. Section 4. The excuse of betrayal. Betrayal doesn't always start with a secret kiss or a hidden message. Sometimes it starts with a simple nod to the question, "Are you okay?" asked by a stranger, not by the husband who slept beside her for 10 years. There's a hard truth to accept. Betrayal isn't a sudden act. It's the final result of a long journey of being forgotten. A relationship doesn't die because one person falls out of love, but because both stopped walking toward each other long ago. They just haven't realized it yet. Madeline's story, a white woman, 41 years old, living in Seattle, proves this truth. She used to be a literature teacher, loved language, obsessed with the poetry of Rilke and Plath. Her husband, Jeffrey, a software engineer, quiet, intelligent, and responsible. They once loved each other passionately in college, wrote each other letters every week while living in different states. But over the years of marriage, raising kids, paying the mortgage, and managing all the essentials of a real family, what remained between them wasn't love, but logistical cooperation. Madeline didn't fall into someone else's arms right away. Before that were long, endless days of not being listened to, nights lying with their backs turned. Many times she wanted to say, "I feel like I'm disappearing," but swallowed it down, afraid of seeming weak. She once told Jeffrey, "We need time for just us." He replied, "When this project's done, I promise." But there was always another project. And feelings don't wait. One Friday night she went out with an old classmate. While standing alone at the bar, a middle-aged man, divorced, asked her, "Are you okay? You seem like you're thinking something very sad." Madeline said that question made her burst into tears, not because that man was important, but because no one had asked her that in so long, not even the man who married her. Nothing happened that night, but a crack had formed, not in the marriage, but in her heart. She wrote in her journal, "I didn't intend to cheat on him, but I stopped feeling loved a long time ago." And when love is no longer a garden tended to, betrayal, whether physical or emotional, is just the final consequence, not a misstep. But the period at the end of a path no one was walking anymore. People often blame the cheater, but few ask, who let go first? Who stayed silent long enough that the other had to find sound elsewhere? Questions to reflect on. In your marriage, are you living with someone or just living beside them? Do you still ask them, "Are you okay today?" The way you did when you first fell in love. Section 5. Marriage without respect. Love may begin with tenderness, but it only survives when upheld by respect. A woman can forgive mistakes, but once she no longer looks up at her man with admiration, that love has already died in silence, even if the heart still beats. Franklin, a former real estate executive in San Jose, once believed he had done everything right. He bought the dream house, provided his wife and children with a life of abundance, and was always present for holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries. He prided himself on being a responsible husband, a true pillar of the family. But when his wife, Eleanor, left after 19 years of marriage, all Franklin could say was, "I thought I gave her everything. Turns out what she needed was for me not to forget myself." At first glance, that may sound contradictory, but within it lies a harsh truth about many modern marriages. A man loses a woman's respect, not because he is weak, but because he forgets who he used to be. After rising to the position of regional director, Franklin began to compromise with himself. He gave up his morning runs because he was too tired, stopped reading because he had no time, and gradually became the kind of husband who pleased his wife so much. He lost his backbone. At first, Eleanor thought she was lucky, but then she felt increasingly disconnected, not because Franklin mistreated her, but because he no longer resembled the man she once admired. She had loved a man who dared to argue, who challenged her thoughts, who had ideals and a strong sense of self. Now, she lived with a man who only nodded and said, "As long as you're happy." One day when their son asked Eleanor, "Do you love Dad?" she answered through tears, "I care about him, but I no longer feel proud to call him the man of my life." And that is what kills a marriage, when a wife no longer sees her husband as someone who can lead, inspire, or simply hold his own presence in life. A husband who over-accommodates his wife believes he's doing the right thing, but unknowingly he wears away the very part of himself that earns a woman's respect, his strength of character. Love requires gentleness, but respect comes from the core, from presence, values, and the courage to live true to oneself. When a man loses that, he may still love his wife, but she will no longer be in love with him. Question to reflect on. Are you sacrificing your self-respect just to hold on to a relationship? And if the woman beside you no longer admires you, is that love or just moral obligation dressed as compassion? Section 6. When men think they've made it. There is a deadly complacency in the mindset of many husbands. They think that once they've married the woman, they're set in status, set in role, set in having secured the heart of the woman they once pursued. But the truth is, love doesn't freeze at the moment the marriage certificate is signed. It needs to breathe, to be nurtured, to be renewed every single day. David, a 45-year-old mechanical engineer living in Denver, used to be the ideal example of a decent man, hard-working, faithful, no gambling, no drinking. He believed himself to be a good husband because he checked all the boxes in society's manual. His wife, Lena, once loved him for his calm demeanor, his stability, and the sense of safety he brought. But after 12 years together, Lena wrote in an email to an old friend, "David is still the same, exactly the same, not worse, but not deeper, not more attentive, not more connected either. It feels like I'm living next to a beta version that never got updated." Lena didn't betray him. She just slowly closed herself off, because every time she opened up about emotions, about loneliness, about the fear of losing herself, David would say, "You're overthinking again." And that sentence, seemingly harmless, was the subtle cut that slowly severed their connection. He didn't realize that while he thought we're still fine, on the other side of the bed was a wife learning how to love herself again, without her husband, without needing his validation. David confused stability with fulfillment, responsibility with presence, not being wrong with being right enough to touch someone's heart. He thought he didn't need to change because "I'm still the man you married." But that was precisely the problem. He was still the man of the past, while she had changed. And instead of walking together, they began to live in parallel, like two tracks, that no longer meet. Many men are like David, living in the illusion that marriage is a permanent status, like a prize to be held forever. But love is an art that requires continuous effort. It does not tolerate emotional laziness. Questions to reflect on. Are you still loving your wife like you did in the beginning? Or are you just living with her like part of the furniture? Are you still the man she once admired, or just an outdated version of yourself? Section 7. The Unnamed Voids. Marriage doesn't die from arguments. It dies from the voids no one dares to name. No one shouts, no one cheats, but neither does anyone speak about how they truly feel. And just like that, love, once burning, slowly fades into silence, like a flame starved of oxygen. Angela, a Latina woman living in Chicago, once confided during a marriage therapy session, "My husband hasn't done anything wrong, but that's exactly what drives me crazy, because he also hasn't done anything right for my soul." She once loved how Jack, her husband, would silently listen. But now that same silence makes her feel like she's talking to a wall. She once found peace in his stability, but now it feels like being trapped. Jack hadn't changed his heart. He still came home on time, still drove the kids to school, still remembered anniversaries. But when Angela tried to open up about the exhaustion in her heart, he simply replied, "Everything's fine, you're just overthinking." And with that, a void began to form. Not between the two of them, but inside her. That void had a name, but no one was brave enough to speak it. Its name was loneliness inside what seemed like a complete relationship. Angela began to retreat. She stopped sharing stories about work, stopped showing the poem she had just written, stopped crying when she felt overwhelmed because she knew no one would see. She still lay beside her husband, but it felt like sleeping next to a stranger who knew the laundry schedule, but no longer knew the rhythm of her heart. Voids in marriage are not always caused by a third person. Sometimes they're caused by the absence of two real people, when the man becomes the family's maintenance worker instead of a companion, when the woman becomes the dutiful executor instead of someone who's truly heard, when both are too afraid to say, "I feel like I'm dying slowly in this relationship," afraid of losing, afraid of shame, afraid of being the one at fault. But love is not about enduring each other until death. Love is about daring to name the void and daring to face it together. Questions to reflect on. How many things have you never told your spouse because you assumed they wouldn't understand, and by doing so, never gave them the chance to understand? Are you sure your marriage is okay, or just quiet enough not to shatter? Section 8. When a woman begins to heal without you. What terrifies a man isn't when his wife cries, it's when she stops crying. When she no longer argues, no longer asks questions, no longer gets jealous, no longer needs him to prove or explain anything. She's still there, cooking meals, taking the kids to school, wishing him good night. But in her eyes, there's no longer any longing. And that's the first sign of something irreversible. The woman has begun to heal without needing you anymore. Michelle, a 39-year-old nurse living in Portland, Oregon, once had a marriage filled with passion. Her husband, Alex, was a handsome, high-energy fitness coach, but extremely hot-tempered. Every argument was a fiery battle where both said the most hurtful things, but then made up, holding each other like they feared losing everything. Michelle once thought that was love, until one day she realized she no longer wanted to fight. One day, when Alex yelled at her for forgetting to buy his favorite protein powder, Michelle simply looked at him and said, "If you want to be mad, be mad. I no longer have the strength to react." Then she walked away, not to make a statement, but just to breathe. From that day forward, Michelle started writing in a journal, practicing yoga, rereading the books she'd neglected since becoming a mum. She cut her hair short, bought the dress her husband once said was too revealing. Not because she wanted to attract someone else, but because she began to choose herself. Alex thought she was changing, but the truth was, She was returning to the woman he once fell in love with, only this time she didn't need him anymore. Men all think their wives will always be there. They believe women always forgive, always wait, always soften. But they forget one thing. Once a woman realizes she can stand on her own, she will never bow again. Michelle didn't cheat, didn't ask for a divorce. But one morning she left a piece of paper on the table, with nothing but 2 lines. "I've tried my best. Now it's time I live the rest of my life for myself." And that was when Alex realized, the most painful thing is not being betrayed, but being left behind by the one who once loved you unconditionally. Questions to reflect on. Are you truly beside the woman of your life, or just next to the last bit of her patience? Are you sure she still needs you tomorrow, or is it just that she's not strong enough yet to walk away? Section 9. When leaving is no longer loud. People often think that breakups are like storms, full of tears, luggage, and blazing accusations. But for women, the true departure often isn't loud at all. It's more like autumn, when the last leaf falls without warning. No sound, no farewell, only a numb emptiness on the branch that once offered shelter. Sandra, an interior designer living in Minneapolis, was in a 14-year marriage with Paul, a good husband by conventional standards. He worked, didn't cheat, didn't hit her, didn't drink. But good doesn't always mean enough. For many years, Sandra silently carried the emotional weight of the family. She was the one to apologize first, the one to plan anniversaries, the one who waited to start a conversation. But slowly, all she received in return was indifference, disguised as stability. She had wanted to leave many times, but stayed. Because the kids were still young. Because her husband hadn't done anything wrong. Because society said, family is where we learn to endure. Then one morning in March, Paul woke up and didn't see his wife. No slamming doors, no tears, no accusations, just emptiness. On the table was a handwritten note, not lengthy, not sorrowful, just a short passage. "You didn't do anything wrong, Paul, but it's your not doing anything that made me leave. I don't need a perfect man. I just need someone who understands that love must be watered every day. And you let it wither so long, I couldn't even recognize it anymore." Paul was stunned. He couldn't understand how such a patient wife like Sandra could leave so easily. But what he didn't know was this. A woman who leaves in silence is someone who left in her heart a long time ago. The moment she stopped telling stories, the moment she stopped asking, "Can you tell I'm sad?" The moment she stopped trying to fix things, because she knew she was patching a sail that had already rotted. It was a quiet exit, but a fierce one. Because it wasn't the end of a fight. It was the end of a long, lonely journey. Questions to reflect on. Do you dare to look into the silence in your relationship, or are you pretending it doesn't exist? Do you still see the woman beside you, or just a routine with the label wife? Section 10. The unspoken truth about a broken marriage. No one gets married to get divorced. No one walks down the aisle planning to leave the one they once called the only one. But love, if not nurtured, will die. Not because of betrayal, not because of mistakes, but because of one simple, brutal truth. No one can endure feeling like they've become taken for granted. Marriage doesn't break in one night. It cracks day by day, through meals without conversation, hugs that grow cold, nights spent in separate worlds. And then, one day, the person who leaves does not do so out of hate, but because they can no longer love alone. Brian, a 52-year-old man in Boston, once had a model family, a capable wife, well-behaved children, a peaceful home. But after the divorce, he confessed, what hurt him most wasn't losing his wife, but realizing she had warned him many times, and he didn't listen. She once said, "I don't feel like a woman anymore when I'm with you." He laughed, thinking it was just a mood swing. She repeated, "Have you ever truly listened to me?" He nodded half-heartedly, because he was in the middle of work, and when she finally said, "I'm tired," he still thought, "This will pass." But it didn't. There are some kinds of tired that don't pass. They silently guide a woman out of your heart, long before she walks out of your house. When a wife chooses to leave, people often ask, "What happened?" But the truth is, there was never just one thing. There were thousands of little things, ignored, buried, postponed, words never said, emotions never understood, needs dismissed as too much. And in the end, a heart once burning with love didn't go cold because someone put it out, but because no one kept the fire alive. Final truth for the man left behind. If you're in a marriage that seems fine, don't celebrate too soon. Silence doesn't mean peace. Acceptance doesn't mean happiness. Living together doesn't mean love is still there. Stop. Look at the woman beside you. Not to check if she still loves you, but to ask yourself, are you still worthy of that love? One last question to face yourself with. Do you dare to love your woman again, as if she could leave at any moment if you're no longer the man she can trust, admire, and believe in? Or will you continue treating love as something you have, until one day it's simply gone?